Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. If you've checked out the title, you'll see we have a guest, and we'll get to them very shortly. But before we do that, Magical Learning is a training and facilitation company that's been running for over 25 years and has partnered with global thought leaders like John Mattone and Robin Sharma. We're now over 300 episodes of this podcast, and we love to chat with experts and share our findings. And we've got one today. We'll get to them shortly because we're going to start with our regular team here. We've got Danette, our Director of Learning, in the mobile recording studio. So, Danette, how's your week going and what's going on?
It's been a good week, Jez. I am on my way home, so I'm about an hour from home. Timing didn't quite work because I had to get a laptop fixed this morning and that took longer than expected. But anyway, headed home and very excited and super excited for today's topic. So can't wait.
Well, Danette, we appreciate your resilience, which we'll get to shortly, to make it onto the podcast despite extenuating circumstances. And as always, it's nice to have you in the mobile recording studio. So thank you so much, Danette. Tess Fyalka, how are you going this week before we get into anything? Our guest.
Oh, Jez, as I mentioned before we went on air, it's been a wild and crazy week. My background is rather minimalist, as you so appropriately termed it, because in the last week I have moved to another state and another city. And so it's kind of pandemonium on my end in the best possible way. But it's all worth it because my husband and I are now closer to our daughter and her family and closer to an international airport where we can fly and see our son much more easily. So it's all good. And at some point I will have something interesting on my wall and I will no longer be surrounded by chaos, which hopefully you cannot see. I think you cannot see.
No, in fact, and that's a good point. You can head over to YouTube and Spotify to watch this, but you'll notice actually Tess's background is very, as I said, clean. You've got a very clean aesthetic for the background, which we love to see here on the Magical Learning Podcast. And we appreciate you fitting us into this, what is a hectic time in anyone's life, moving house. So very much appreciate that, Tess.
Glad to do so. Yes.
Now, Tess, we have so much to talk about today because your book, as I was mentioning, is exactly the kind of book that Magical Learning loves to talk about. But before we get there, Tess, we'll probably have listeners that may be being introduced to you for the first time. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into what the book's about?
Sure. So my company is Angle Coaching and Communication. So I've been an independent contractor for many, many years and started out working with a management consulting company. And it's really in my work with them where I fell in love with all things leadership and management. And then I went to work for a client of mine for about 10 years and I built their training and development and leadership development and coaching infrastructure. And then I went back out on my own and have been doing that now for almost, once again, 3 years, 14 years the first round. And so you don't have to add up all those numbers. But, just I've been at this for a very long time and having a lot of fun. I love what I do. Like most of us in this business, we love what we do because we're so passionate about helping teams and helping leaders and helping organizations function more effectively. And I'm a leadership development coach, a corporate trainer, a speaker, and most recently an author. So here we are.
Well, I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to be hearing. And then we also, as we've said, we love to have experts on and we love to talk about books. And this book is exactly the kind of thing that we love to deep dive into. So the book itself is called Walking the Leadership Ledge, The New Leader's Guide to Building Resilience and Confidence at Every Step. Now, this sounds perfect for us. So before we dive really into the conversation, did you want to tell us a little bit about this book and maybe a little bit about how you sort of came up with the ideas around it?
You talk to authors on a regular basis, and you probably hear this over and over again. But for the sake of it's part of my story, so I'll repeat it. But there was a book inside of me that had to get out. It was just one of those things that I've always known I needed to write a book. I wanted to write a book, and the years passed, and I still hadn't written the book, and raised the children, still hadn't written the book, and worked and still hadn't written the book. And finally, it was when I was getting ready to go back into business for myself. I was working with a coach. As all good coaches, we work with coaches, and she really, she just said to me, she said, Tess, it's time to write the book. You've got all the material. You've got all the information. It's time to write the book. And she really gave me the nudge that I needed. And And I made the commitment and I signed with a publishing company, and it was absolutely hands down the most challenging thing I've ever done professionally. And you probably have heard that before. And if either of you have written books yourselves, you know this to be the case. And I had written quite a bit before that. I was a ghostwriter, also for many years, and it just, but it was worth every moment to get it done.
Wow. Well, I mean, there's so many questions coming out of that I have. And I think that's amazing because, you're just thinking about even someone who's done ghostwriting can struggle to write their own book, which, we do hear it's often such a big struggle, but that's such an interesting insight, because a lot of people might be struggling themselves writing their books right now. And it's good to know that people with experience, even inside that world, can find it difficult.
Absolutely. Yes. But worth it. Absolutely. Power through, push through. And I was fortunate because I had a content editor, and, she kept me on task, and it was like, okay, when's the next chapter coming? Where are you on the chapter? And I think many of us really need that. That's the accountability, right? Somebody to hold us accountable.
Well, I love that. Well, I'm going to throw to Danette now. Danette, you can open up our conversation here with what was your question? Tell us a little bit about why you chose it.
So, as always, Tess, I love 2 questions because I'm a curious person. And I was really curious. You talk in the sort of information about your book about there's 7 derailing communication styles. And I know that communication, a lot of people think they get better every day because they communicate, but they don't actually concentrate on what they need to improve. So I'm really curious about those 7 derailing styles. If you could share a little bit more about them.
Sure. That's such a good question. And so, first of all, the 7 derailers, the communication styles are aloof, arrogant, controlling and critical, indecisive, perfection, and passive. And so what I'd like to do is kind of frame those in 3 buckets, if you will. And from the perspective of, if we talk about a developing leader, an emerging leader, it's maybe somebody who was an individual contributor and they've been moved into a management role. So I share an example of Liam in the book. And so Liam is, as an individual contributor, he is the go-to guy to get stuff done. I mean, he is efficient, he's fast, you can count on him. He's the guy that you want on your team when you have got to get stuff done, and is widely respected and appreciated as an individual contributor. So Liam gets promoted into management, and that get after it, go get it done approach it served him really well as an individual contributor. Now, as a manager, it's coming across as controlling and perfectionist, and he has trouble connecting with the clients because he knows in his mind how he wants things done, and his way is the right way. And so he can come across as abrasive, he can come across as arrogant. And so it's that recognition in the example of Liam. It's like, wow, in the immortal words of Marshall Goldsmith, what got him here will not get him here. So that's one example. And then if we think about another leader, let's call him Travis. And Travis is like a duck on the water. He is cool and calm under pressure. And if the chaos is swirling around Travis is not going to get sucked into the pandemonium. He's just steady as can be. Then Travis gets moved into a higher position, a leadership or management position, and that seemingly calm, cool demeanor now is coming across as aloof and cold. And so he's struggling to build relationships with his team members. And then the third bucket that I like to talk about, let's say, we'll call this person Jackie. And Jackie is another one of those folks. Everybody loves Jackie. She's the first to volunteer. She's taking care of everybody. Is everybody happy? And she's gonna get it done as well if she has to stay until 11 o'clock at night to do it herself. And everybody loves her. She just is this warm and friendly and delightful human being. And then she gets promoted into a leadership or management position, and she's struggling to have the difficult conversations, to hold people accountable, to set clear expectations. And so, all of those are examples of how those communication styles, those behaviors serve us really well at certain stages. But then when we have to get work done through others, when we have to lead, when we have to manage, those become oftentimes our Achilles heels. As I'm sure you've talked about many, many times, how our strengths become our weaknesses. And I also like to describe it like it's like facets of a gemstone, okay? And it's like you've polished a couple of those facets of that gemstone that is you, and they're really, really strong. And so you lean into those all the time, but as a leader, as a manager, you've got to cultivate a whole different set of competencies. And so they're there. You just haven't polished the facets of that, those other facets of that gemstone that is your leadership and management style that you're eventually going to come into if you can hopefully get some training and some coaching and some mentoring and some guidance that will help you identify the blind spots. We pull those strengths forward. It's not like we don't pull those strengths forward. We want to pull them forward, and we also want to cultivate and develop the other competencies that we need. Does that help to answer your question?
That's an awesome answer, and it sort of leads into my next question, which was really, how do managers then not fall into that trap? So you sort of started about, we still use those particular strengths or skills, but we also need to develop. So if I'm sort of prepping myself to go into a management or a leadership position soon, what could be some things that I could do to make sure that I don't end up with those derailers when I hit those positions where I'm working with others?
Yeah, Danette, I am a real advocate of 360 reviews, but 360 reviews that are used for development purposes, and they are absolutely one of the scariest things that a leader at any stage in their development, an individual contributor at any stage in their development can go through. But they're so effective, and if it is handled in a way that where the environment, it's a psychologically safe environment, and it is conducted with an instrument that's been validated, and it is used, as I mentioned, for development purposes, and this person receives coaching and training coming out of that, and it's completely confidential, then it can be truly a transformative tool that will really help this person to identify, what are the blind spots, because we all have them. But of course, that's incredibly frightening, because for many managers and new leaders, when they're moving from individual contributor, there's so much pressure. They feel like they've got to prove themselves, and they don't, they're hoping that nobody sees, the chinks in the armor that they know are there. But in fact, everybody sees the chinks in the armor, and it's really, frankly, it's much, much easier on the other side when it's like, okay, yeah, I acknowledge, there's some chinks in my armor, and I'm working on it. That's much easier said than done, and oftentimes that it requires a very self-aware individual. And while I'll see that in some high potentials, if you will, earlier on in their career, it's not all that common, if I'm being truly candid. And so oftentimes what happens is their back is against the wall, and the organization had all of this hope that this, it's, I use an example for, let's say there's Kelly in accounting, and Kelly's an amazing accountant. And so, the leadership, the higher ups believe that, well, if we make Kelly a manager, then everybody else is going to be this amazing accountant. And then, of course, it doesn't happen. And the wheels are falling off the bus, and Kelly's in over her head, and all of those things, as you well know. And because Kelly is leaning into the strengths and the competencies that she needed when she was an individual contributor. And so if organizations will invest in developing their people so that they can step into leadership much more effectively, they can, maybe not hit the ground running, but maybe they could hit the ground walking, and not stumbling and falling, flat on their face, and it would save the organization an enormous amount of money. And because I'm not sure what for years it costs 4 times someone's salary to replace them. And I'm not sure if that's still accurate or not. I think the last time I checked on that it was, but it costs so much money, and then the impact on the team members and engagement, the collateral damage. Investing a little bit to help these folks move more effectively into leadership, then that also, if we think about 80% of the strategy is executed at the front line, and these folks are either already designated as managers or leaders, or they are managers and leaders by default, or they're in a position of influence. And let's consider, if 80% of the strategy is executed at the front line, shouldn't we be making sure that our frontline leaders are well prepared to lead, are equipped to lead? I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Mm-hmm.
Great answer. So thanks so much, Tess, and I can't wait to hear the answers to the other questions. Thank you.
Yes, and great questions, Danette. Tess, this has made me think of 2 things very quickly, and I just wanted to touch on them. One is, speaking of this technical to manager role, I remember experiencing a very bad version of this, and I have a very direct experience of this. I worked at a very unsuccessful tourist attraction in the cafe, so there was very few people that would come through. So I'd work in a cafe, might have some hours where 2 people came through, okay? There's a lot of dead time. And we had a manager that was promoted because they were really good at making coffee, okay? But they ran it like a military ship. It was every minute was, are we checking the temperature, making sure this is validated? It was, can we clean the coffee machine? So it became a stressful job with very few customers. And what was interesting was they ended up seeing that as actually a negative, because people were really not wanting to work with this person, because on their normal shifts, like the actual higher ups were okay with you sort of, if once you'd done everything, you could do a bit of Sudoku or whatever, not on your phone, but you could do something, like get a paper book or whatever. And that for me was the first time that I realized, like, this person is definitely the best at making coffees. They're the best at cleaning the place, and they actually care the most about all those things, but they are getting the worst out of everyone else from that. And it's just because of that technical thing. And it's so interesting, like how you've just talked about, people can have these skills, but then it doesn't reflect in these other ways. So anyway, that was something that instantly shot into my mind when you were talking about this.
And that is a hilarious example. I mean, I love that example. Oh my gosh, I might have to include that in my next book. If there is a next book.
Yes, there's definitely going to be a next book. I can already tell. This is good. But it also reminded me of, I'm a big fan of the NBA. I love watching basketball from over there. And something you said about new managers wanting to prove themselves really solidified something I've never understood, which is sometimes a new owner will buy a team and they will trade away all these good players for one really star player. And it's actually it's a net loss, but there's a bigger star on the thing. I always wondered why they'd do that. But I'm starting to understand new managers want to show their style. This is how I've been successful, whatever, maybe it's flashy. And so that's why they do it. But I'd never thought about it. So I'm loving your approach of using psychology in this as well. Like, we're sort of thinking how people process decision making, opening up a lot of things in my mind anyway, is what I'm trying to say here. Let's jump into the real questions that we've got here. So let's jump over to John's question here. John has written in, are you experiencing moments of panic over possibly falling short and disappointing your bosses, or fear of not knowing the answers? How much of this do we need to embrace, or do we have this stop us from looking for a promotion and taking on a leadership role?
If we think about when we kind of going back to what you were talking about, when you are in a position and you're promoted into a position, as you and I both have touched on now, and there's all this pressure to prove yourself and to perform. And so yeah, there are moments of panic. And what happens to us, right? We go into fight, flight, or freeze. And so the smallest part of our brains takes over. It's the amygdala hijacking. And so when we are in that state of fear, then we can't engage in complex problem solving. And and when we're in that place, then things are we look at things, we can't see the whole. It's black or white. I win or I lose. I am a success or I'm a failure. And so yeah, there is, there is that fear and there is that panic, that is a natural human reaction when we feel like we are at risk. And so there's the acknowledgement of that. Yeah, I'm probably gonna, feel a lot of anxiety around that, and expecting that, and not pretending that, oh, everything's gonna be, sunshine and gummy bears now because I've been promoted and I got the big raise or whatever. But if there is an opportunity once again for a leader to have, even if it's even a book, and to have some idea what to expect as they step out of the individual contributor position into a manager position or a leader position, and some recognition that, yes, I'm going to have to develop some additional competencies. I'm not just, it doesn't happen through osmosis. I have the title now. It doesn't mean I have all the answers. And in fact, truth be told, I have fewer answers now because I haven't learned all of the roles of and what's going on with the people around me. And if I set myself up to believe that I should have all the answers, yeah, I'm going to fall flat on my face because it's simply not possible. And so the recognition that and the acknowledgement of, yeah, I'm in a new position. I'm going to make some mistakes and I'm going to learn from those mistakes. And as I have said many, many times over the years in working with both individual contributors and managers, is, yeah, your three best friends are the words "I don't know." And acknowledging that, because most people will say, "Hey, I appreciate that you're candid with me, and how can I help you succeed?" And if we invite their input, if we go into a manager position and we acknowledge that, hey, look, I don't know everything that Jim does over there in his role in the warehouse, but now I'm overseeing Jim. So I need to get curious about what's Jim's role. What is he hoping from his new manager, from me, his new manager? What hopes does he have? What's he concerned about? What are some of his fears? Some things that he's worried about? And where I can walk into that position and start building those relationships through the lens of curiosity, not through the lens of, I'm the manager now and I've got all the answers, but through the lens of, hey, let's sit on the same side of the table and talk about the challenges that we together are facing. And hey, I'm not going to have all the answers. I might have the title, but I still have a lot to learn. And I'd like for you to be my partner in this and help me learn. I don't know if I answered your question or John's question, but feel free to follow up.
No. I think the good thing that you've done there, and you did answer the question, but I think the thing that you've done really well is you've connected two things that I think a lot of people are not going to put together, and they're going to see as quite sort of away from each other. So maybe you can talk about this a little bit more, which is that idea of leadership and then also listening. Because I think a lot of people may think leadership, I've got to steer the ship, I've got to be the sort of the visionary. But what you're talking about a lot through this leadership sort of concept is being on the same side of the table, listening. How do we work on this together? So do you want to talk a little bit about maybe people that may see that maybe the wrong way, or how you sort of see that dichotomy?
And I think, Jez, that's a perfect example of yes and. Yes, they do have to be a visionary, and they do have to say, this is where we're going, and I see it, and I see how you fit into this, and you fit into this, and you fit into this, and what we're going to create is magic. I mean, we are going to do great things, and I have the vision, and I need to be able to communicate that vision, and I need to be curious. How do you see your role in this? What would you suggest would be the best approach for helping us get to that point based on your experience and what you know? Because great leaders surround themselves with great people. And they cultivate that in their people, and they can bring that out. They can bring out that greatness in them because they respect the contribution that those other contributors bring to helping the organization move forward in achieving that vision. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I mean, I don't know why my mind is going to sort of thinking of like the X-Men and, like that Marvel kind of comic. And the idea for me is just thinking like, if you went to each of them and like, how can we best use this? There may be elements that they like of their skills that you may not be thinking about. The ice guy cooling down drinks, for example, for people is one that I saw on the movie, but there's many examples where people can contribute in ways you probably never thought of. I think actually your answer does lead nicely into my question though, because it sort of is around this idea. So as I was reading through a lot of the information about your book, I did notice a lot of terms that seem to come back to concepts around friction in business, whether it be communication styles that derail, eliminating turnover, addressing dysfunction. I'm just hearing a lot of sort of friction. So I guess my question is, why do so many teams run into friction?
Oh, I love this question. I've loved all the question, but I really love this question. And so here's the thing, like, how often do we hear teams say, well, we had a conversation and, we want accountability and we want communication and we want trust and we want respect. And yeah, everybody's going, oh yeah, we want all those things. But there's rarely a conversation about what does trust look like in action on this team, in this organizational dynamic. What are the behaviors that we're going to see from each other that communicate to Danette that I'm trustworthy, and that Jez communicates to me that he's trustworthy? And similarly, with something like accountability. Well, my idea of accountability may be very different than Danette's or Jez's, and so they oftentimes, feel like, well, we checked the box. We established our ground rules, about how, the things that we want on the team. But, geez, well, Bob isn't accountable because he never responds, right away when I expect him to respond right away. And so I work with teams on a team alignment and a team alignment pact where we get into what do these terms mean, and what's it going to look like in action, and how are you going to make sure that team pact stays vibrant and stays not static but dynamic, and so that you're checking in. How are we showing up? Are we living up to these things? How did we not have a conversation about this element that is truly proving to be very important to the success of the team? So that it's so often the roads do lead back to having conversations about what do we need from each other to be successful, and moving out of the it's not about me and it's not about you, and it's about what are we trying to create, what magic are we trying to create in this organization that is going to deliver an amazing experience for our stakeholders, for our customers, that is meaningful and impactful and part of the reason that we are here in this organization and want to come to work every single day.
Wow. Amazing once again. And I'm just going to say one thing that it sparked for me again. This conversation is really sparking a lot of ideas for me today. And one is around how much clarity is so important. And what it's made me think of is, I know this sounds a little abstract maybe, but how politicians are sometimes quite the opposite of this, in that I'm just thinking in a purely Australian perspective here. It's something that every political party says is they want to give every Aussie a fair go. That can mean anything, however you want to slice it. And every political party can say that because in their mind, there may be different versions of what each of those words mean. But that's now clarified to me sort of how that can kind of operate is like, if we aren't clear on what definitions are, then we are going to have different ideas of what that means. So I really think that, that's explained a lot. So thank you for that.
Yes. And we can hide. We can hide when there's a lack of clarity. You know, I mean, then there's the smoke and mirrors. But if there is clarity, then, okay, this is what we decided. This is clear. And everybody has a voice in creating that. It's not just me as the manager saying, well, this is what accountability looks like to me, and you all need to step up. I mean, yes, I have my voice, okay, but I also need to get the input from my team members around what does accountability look like for them, because maybe I'm the manager and I'm saying, well, Betsy needs to be responding immediately, but I'm taking 48 hours to respond. Okay. So that, all of those things that we put on the table when we have these conversations to ensure at least somewhat move closer to greater clarity.
Yeah, well, I love that. Speaking of clarity, this term I also liked. I'm glad Lega's asked, our graphic designer Allegra asked this, was you used the term derailing. Can you tell me a little more about it and how it can help companies?
Yeah, so we've been talking about delegation, for decades, and we recognize that a leader has to do many things, but a couple of them, they have to scale their capacity. They have to be able to get work done through others. And so in scaling their capacity, they simply cannot do it all. And this is oftentimes a real struggle for many leaders. But individual contributors, they're moving into management, it wasn't all that long ago, and I had a conversation with a vice president, and he said, well, if I don't do it, well, how am I contributing to the organization? I mean, he was really struggling with recognizing that he had to scale his capacity, and so anyway, back to derailing. So derailing, basically, what it is engaging your team through delegation, and so often the leader will hold back on delegating, one, out of fear, as I mentioned, and other reasons as well. I don't have time to train them or to teach them how to do this, or I don't want them to have to do this hard thing, and so I should just go ahead and do it, and those kinds of things. And so if we think about derailing as a way in which we're actually engaging our people, we're developing our people, and most team members want to grow. They want to learn. They want to do more. And so if you can look at, okay, what am I doing? Do an inventory, take a few days and do an inventory of everything that is on your list that you're doing, and looking at that list and what are the things that truly only you can do. And then from there, who on your team if you look at something that is an energy drainer for you, might be an energizer or a member of your team, and how can you take some of those items on your list and share them, engage your team members in executing on those things that are important. They need to get done, but you are not the only person who can do that. And you will scale your capacity, and you will engage your team members. You'll allow them to grow in giving them this responsibility. Now, the other piece of this is that recognition of, yeah, but I really want it done this way. Okay. All right. So, because that's a reality, right? Somebody they're really good at this, and, this was their baby. They established the system or the process or whatever. And, okay, fine. All right. You're not ready to let them just really take the ball and run with it. It's reality, human behavior, really reality. So what do you need to feel comfortable with how this project, this task is being executed. And so that's when you're practicing clearly articulating what success looks like, what your expectations look like. And then also you're setting up with the team member checkpoints. All right. So that, okay, you want to know how things are going. So you're going to check in. The two of you are going to schedule that you're going to check in on the status of this in the next, week. And they're going to show you their process, how they're doing it. You're going to give feedback, and you're not going to swoop in and take over. You're going to give feedback for how what changes you might like to see or you need to see, so that your comfort level is you're slowly letting go of things that are perhaps really too important to you to just cut ties with entirely. And as your trust grows in this person's ability to execute as you want and need them to execute, then eventually you can get to the point where they're going to do it well, and you don't have to be so hands-on. But it's this idea that again, recognizing human behavior and not expecting someone to just completely let go, but also seeing delegation being critical to your scaling your capacity and engaging your team members and creating a system and a process for how that can be done in a way that you grow as a leader and your team members grow as contributors, and you're also developing other leaders.
That is a great framework, and I think we need more people thinking kind of in that way. And just sort of, I guess, a last question here we'll get to, which is from Marg, and I think that this kind of is a good kind of way to round this conversation out. Marg always likes asking a sort of family-related question, so we've got one here. Are there ways to instill this into your kids to help them grow into leadership, or even concepts that might be good for them to understand?
So one of my favorite examples, and I'm sure you've heard this many times before, but Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, she has spoken about how her father reframed failure and not what did you succeed at today or this week, but what did you fail at, and this recognition that failure is how we grow. That's the things that were most difficult for us are those things that really helped us develop and grow the most. So that there's one, that reframing of failure. And then also always looking at how are we as parents creating a psychologically safe environment where our children can come to us with the things that they're struggling with. And I'm no child psychologist, obviously, but basically at the end of the day, we're all 8-year-olds in adult bodies. But how are we as parents creating an environment where children feel comfortable coming to us with their emotions and the things that didn't go well and the struggles and the questions, the curiosity, always encouraging that curiosity and that inquisitiveness and experimentation, and where that's just something that is natural to them, and not bridling those things, so that when they are in an environment where it's a new environment, they're more comfortable experimenting and trying things out and being curious and asking the questions, rather than automatically going to the safety mode and the fear mode of I've got to protect myself, but rather how can we instill that, helping them to continually engage the prefrontal cortex and the experimentation that is so natural for children, but we learn over time to bridle that. And how can we as parents continue to foster that in our children? Long answer to your question, but those are a few things that come to mind.
No, that's perfect. And I think that's a great place to kind of leave us because at the end of the day, as you've mentioned, we're all 8-year-olds in adult bodies, so we can all apply this anyway to ourselves at the very least. So I love that. Tess, I'm going to grab some final thoughts from everybody. And I might start with Danette. Danette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I loved the buckets you put around those 7 communication style derailer traits. Loved your stories, Tess. The other thing I really liked, and I think this is a really important message around that Del Engage, is that for leaders that they do need to look at how they scale their capacity. And so doing what you did, and as you said, Marshall Goldsmith saying, what got you here is not going to get you there, is a really important thing. And we will fail. It will feel uncomfortable. And that's just part of that leadership journey. So great conversation. Totally enjoyed. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Danette. And great questions. And I loved it. I was going to say just some final thoughts I had. I also really loved how you talked about when you were talking about the 3 buckets, they were also 3 people. So I thought that helped really make it a little bit more sticky, especially 3 people that you would think, based on the first things you were saying, would make them good leaders in some capacity, be they a good technician, be they sort of cool, calm and collected, or if they're sort of overly friendly. All of these things seem like potentially positive traits in leaders, but I think you did a great job of framing how they can also sort of have a dark side if they're not managed kind of well, amongst other things. And yeah, I took so many notes: fight, flight, and freeze, new managers. I had also obviously all the ideas I was having throughout the podcast. So thank you so much for this. I was going to ask, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation? Any things that you wanted to leave our audience with regarding the chat that we had?
Well, first of all, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I'm so glad I discovered it. That is, one of the best things about going on podcasts is you discover all these amazing podcasts that are out there. So first of all, thank you. And I loved your questions. I really appreciated your questions. And I think if I had to say just a couple of things to wrap things up, I think with leadership, I think, yes, it is hard. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't, but we also make it harder than it needs to be. And I believe that if we can have clarity around what are our values, what's important to us, and how do I bring the best of myself and how do I bring out the best in my team members, that is a guiding source for us as we are leading. We increase our potential to be effective exponentially. And then again, I will say curiosity is your best friend, regardless of where you are in your leadership, individual contributor, management journey. And the 3 words, I don't know, will open up so many doors for you.
Well, I think they're great words to sort of leave with. Now, Tess, I'm sure people have been listening to this conversation gone, I need to get a copy of this book and I need to reach out to you. So do you want to give our audience the best place to do those things?
So the book is available on Amazon, Audible, and all paperback and Kindle as well. And please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out to me on my book website, walkingtheleadershipledge.com, or on my coaching website, which is anglecoaching.com. That's ANGLE. So I would love to connect with members of your audience.
Excellent. Well, I think they'll be excited to connect with you, where all those links will be available in the show notes. So you can go click on those right now and get yourself a copy and connect with Tess. Danette, I want to say thank you so much for today's conversation. Great questions and great insights and great chat. No worries. And thank you for joining us via the mobile recording studio. Once again, we appreciate your commitment to the podcast. Tess, I want to thank you so much for being a great guest. Great to meet you on this podcast. I think we've had a great chat. Hopefully one of many we have on the podcast with you. So thank you so much for being a great guest today. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you so much. Like I said, if you are just listening to this, you can view it on YouTube and Spotify. Well, we're now at over 20,000 subscribers and over 300 episodes. So go subscribe there and check it out. I want to thank everybody that's listening. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.